Hello and welcome to this special broadcast of the WION-VOA Co-Production with me, Priyanka Sharma, on WION World is One. We begin with the latest updates coming in the Ukraine war. With the help of international experts, Ukraine is now rushing to collect evidence of widespread war crimes using 21st century technology to bring the perpetrators to justice. VOA brings us this next detailed report. A warning to our viewers before we proceed, this story contains graphic images.
More than 50,000 police officers have been deployed to the combat areas of Ukraine. They're not just working to repel Russia's invasion, they're also investigating crimes, war crimes.
Almost 21,000 criminal proceedings have been filed for crimes committed under martial law. Among them are almost 9,000 criminal proceedings on the facts of crimes committed on the territory of Ukraine by servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and their accomplices.
A mission of experts tasked by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe found what they call clear patterns of international humanitarian law violations.
There have been cases of killings, there have been cases of torture, there have been cases of rapes.
Dangerous conditions prevented them from working on site, but they didn't need to. There's a vast digital record.
There is practically everything visible on the internet in form of videos, in form of pictures, or also in testimonies of victims.
21st century forensics are helping Ukraine's Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova too. She has gathered thousands of photos and videos by crowdsourcing through an official website.
Social media is very important too, because we can use these open resources, and we have the team of near 100 prosecutors who work with open resources. And for us, very useful to analyze this information.
But making these images admissible in a trial is the goal of the British charity behind the Eyewitness to Atrocities app. The app collects the time, location, and other verification data that prosecutors can take to court.
First is where and when the footage was taken, making sure that we know that information, making sure the footage hasn't been edited, so its integrity is intact, and making sure that we could trace the lifespan of that footage to know that nobody had any access to make any changes.
It's a tsunami of information that the Ukrainian authorities need to comb through. The United States is helping protect this motherlode from hackers.
The war that's being fought in the information sphere is just as active as what's going on the ground. We're trying to provide a wide range of support to the Ukrainian authorities to help them deal with all the contingencies that they're going to confront as they look into these crimes.
At the United Nations, Prosecutor Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court told VOA that tech isn't a substitute for older forensic tools, but it extends the power of human recollection.
You can imagine a witness very often traumatized. With the passage of time, their memories naturally may change, may falter. If forensic evidence is collected properly, it's more capable to be viewed as reliable once it's been tested and it's been looked into.
It may take years before the evidence reaches the criminal court. Russian authorities who deny war crimes didn't respond to numerous interview requests. There are allegations of war crimes by Ukrainian nationals, though far fewer. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General Venediktova told VOA she will investigate and cooperate with the International Criminal Court. Veronica Valderas Iglesias for VOA News, Washington.
And now for more insights, joining us now is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. As we know, the US is now considering a new round of aid in response to the Ukraine war, but it's raising quite a lot of questions about American military stockpiles. What more can you tell us about the same?
Well, we're talking about javelins, which are these incredibly powerful anti-tank missiles, and they've become so popular in Ukraine that President Joe Biden earlier this week joked that some people are naming their newborn babies Javelin or Javelina in Ukraine. But the U.S. government has given almost a third now of its stockpile to Ukraine, and it's going to take a number of years for the U.S. to replenish those. They need those for national security. And on top of that, there are other supply chain issues with military hardware here in the United States. The Taiwan Defense Ministry recently saying that the COVID pandemic has slowed its own delivery of U.S. howitzers.
Right. Jessica, just to follow up with that, the United Nations Food Aid Agency is now calling on Kiev to reopen its Black Sea ports to permit shipping of wheat and corn exports. Tell us more about that.
Well, the World Food Program says that the majority of Ukraine's grain exports are now stranded because they are not able to get through those Black Sea ports. We're talking about an estimated 4.5 million metric tons of grain. They are talking now about what they're calling a grain bridge because they can't get ships moving. Could they get them perhaps out by train via Poland and some of the other neighboring countries? But the key concern for the WFP, or the World Food Program here, is all the poorer nations that rely on these grain exports. For example, Yemen depends on more than half of its imports of grain, which come from Ukraine.
Jessica, thanks so much for all those inputs. Stay with us on this special broadcast. We'll come back to you for your inputs on another story. And now let's go to a piece for our audience on the upcoming US-ASEAN summit at the White House. The 10 members of the Association of the Southeast Asian Nations make up India's 6th largest trading partner. Next week, 8 of those leaders will gather at the White House during a critical time for regional security concerns and increasing economic engagement. Let's take a look at this next VOA report.
In the decades ahead.
Since the first ASEAN summit was held in the U.S. in 2016 at Sunnylands in California, Southeast Asian leaders have witnessed a military coup, natural disasters, a pandemic, and now fuel and food shortages due to the war in Ukraine and China's port lockdowns.
In Asia, trade, for example, is often perceived as strategy. And we know historically that while the United States has been very, very successful in the security element of strategy, it's the trade dimension of strategy that has been more challenging.
While 6 ASEAN member states are among Washington's top trading partners, experts say the U.S. will not unveil any major economic engagement initiatives during the summit. So what can the summit deliver for the region? Observers say Southeast Asia wants reassurances that American military support for NATO and Ukraine will not come at a cost to continuing its commitments in the Indo-Pacific.
This is the classic Goldilocks problem in Southeast Asia. Everything the U.S. does is either too much or too little. It's never just right. And that speaks to how much the region wants the U.S. to get this right, but there's always this constant anxiety.
Experts also say Washington needs to send a clear message on the U.S.-China relationship, particularly around freedom of navigation in the South China Sea.
You have to see strong condemnation of Chinese behavior at every summit like this, or some parties in the region point and say, see, the U.S. is going wobbly.
Certainly, it is valuable for ASEAN member states to understand and therefore figure out if there's going to be subsequent shifts or further changes in the U.S.-China relationship. How do they, quote unquote, maybe take advantage of those shifts?
One area where ASEAN is already stepping in is providing an alternative to the Chinese manufacturing supply chain. The US-ASEAN Business Council says Malaysia is expected to announce increased cooperation with American semiconductor manufacturers. And as Southeast Asia increases its economic integration with the rest of the world, trading partners, including India, are watching the summit closely.
For India in particular, there are many of its own interests in the area, whether it's energy security, the security of the trade through the critical straits of Southeast Asia.
After all, say experts, this dynamic region is increasingly at the heart of so many of this century's biggest global challenges and opportunities. Jessica Stone, VOA News, Washington.
And to throw more light on this story, we still have Jessica Stone from Voice of America with us on this broadcast. Jessica, thanks for staying on. The White House was expected to unveil the US-China strategy this week, and ahead of that crucial summit, Secretary of State Blinken had come down with COVID. What does that mean for this China strategy announcement, and can you tell us what's in it?
Well, we don't know yet when it's going to be positioned and given. We hope it's going to be ahead of the US-ASEAN summit, but that just gives us a couple of days because that's starting less than a week from now. Secretary Blinken is vaccinated and boosted, but it's worth noting this is the second time one of his Southeast Asian opportunities has been delayed by COVID. Remember, in December, his trip there was cut short by COVID in one of the journalists following him. It's unclear whether he's going to be able to attend the US-ASEAN meetings, but in terms of the content of the US-China strategy, I think the several key things to mention here that we expect. They're going to keep the Trump-era tariffs. They're going to encourage U.S. companies to screen their investments with China. And we also expect that they will be able to delist Chinese companies from the New York Stock Exchange if they don't comply with the U.S. accountability and accounting rules that have been levied. We're going to really see this posture change by the U.S. government that has already been laid out in the last year of the administration, which is we won't see the word engagement. We don't expect to see the word cooperation. You remember under Obama, we heard cooperation on health and climate change. Now we're going to see the Chinese government be put on competitive footing with the U.S. government in terms of the U.S.-China strategy.
Right, Jessica, also the summit is part of a months-long campaign of engagement between the U.S. and the Asia-Pacific. What other events are we expecting at this point?
Well, there's going to be a big trip later this month for U.S. President Joe Biden, his first to the region as president. He's going to be spending time in South Korea in Seoul. We don't know yet whether he's going to be at the DMZ, but then he moves on to go to Tokyo, Japan, where he will meet with the new prime minister there. And he will also have a meeting with the Quad countries. Of course, India, Australia, Japan, and the United States recently formed this framework for regional security cooperation. He's expected to do extensive meetings with them at the end of the month. And some key issues, obviously, North Korea's recent ballistic missile tests, as well as the results of the Philippine election, which is just happening over this next weekend, and that Solomon Islands security pact with China, which has caused so much distress in Australia. Priyanka?
Right, Jessica, thanks so much for summing that all up for us, and thanks for joining us on this special broadcast.
You bet.